Congratulations, you made it to the second round of the fantasy football playoffs, but the job is not finished yet. Our job in this video is to make sure that you get to the final round and win the whole dang thing, because in this video, we are talking about 10 players that I think are going to go absolutely crazy in week 16 of fantasy football. But before we get into it, really quickly, we're giving away $100 yet again. All you have to do, like the video, make sure you're subscribed, comment anything down below, and I'll pick a winner in the next 48 hours or so. There is also going to be another giveaway hidden in this video. First one to find it wins another prize. Let's start with my bold call of the week, and it's DJ Moore. I think this Bears passing game is probably going to run through the veteran receiver tonight on Saturday Night Football against the Green Bay Packers. A massive game, NFC North showdown, and we know the Bears are going to be down Rome Odunze and Luther Burden, so Moore is probably going to be Caleb Williams' favorite target through the air. I think Colson Loveland, the tight end, also has a nice game. And this matchup against the Packers could quietly be a shootout. And we saw these two teams face off only a couple weeks ago in week 14. 49 total points were scored. I think something similar probably happens tonight, especially considering Green Bay is down their best player on defense for the season. As a Packer fan, this hurts a lot. Micah Parsons done for the year, torn ACL, which is going to massively help Caleb Williams be able to have time to throw the football, to not worry about this lion, this beast, this monster of Micah Parsons running down his throat. So that means that, yeah, it does have shootout potential, because I don't think the Packers defense is going to be as good as they have been as of late. Obviously, the Packers secondary has also given up 15 touchdowns to receivers this season, which is the 7th most in the NFL. And they could also be down another key part of their defense. Stud safety Evan Williams dealing with a knee injury, questionable. So we'll see. It could be really beneficial for the Bears. I think this offense could potentially destroy this Packers defense. As a Packer fan, let's hope not, but all signs are pointing to a massive game for DJ Moore in the fantasy semifinals when you need him the most. I'm projecting 7 receptions, 110 yards, and a touchdown. All right, moving on to our next guy, Aaron Jones. Listen, I get it. At this point, no one is jumping up and down, super excited to put Jones in their lineup, especially with your fantasy life on the line. 31-year-old running back who's been okay this season. But I do think Jones can get it done for you this week, mainly because the matchup is very favorable against the Giants, who have been absolutely horrendous against the run since week 11, allowing a league-high 6 yards per carry, the most rushing yards per game, most yards after contact per attempt, the second highest explosive run rate, and they're allowing the second most fantasy points per game to the position. And the usage for Jones as of late has been promising. 14+ opportunities in each of his last 2 games, and he's been the preferred option in the backfield over Jordan Mason. And this Vikings offense as a whole is trending in the right direction. JJ McCarthy is starting to look like an NFL quarterback. Not great, but he's playing at an average level, which is much better than he has been playing, which should allow this offense to sustain drives, to get into the red zone, to score touchdowns. I think Aaron Jones is a nice flex play in week 16. All right, moving on to our next guy, DK Metcalf, who's starting to heat up as of late to his standards. I don't think Metcalf has been amazing this year, but we have seen a nice uptick in his production, 14+ fantasy points in 3 out of his last 4 games. He did only see 3 targets last week, but he was able to get into the end zone. He did see 12 targets in week 14, which is promising. You like to see that. You're obviously signing up for some inconsistencies when starting Metcalf, but with the potential game script and matchup against the Lions this week, I think it's all setting up for another big game for DK, as the Lions have given up the most yards to receivers since week 11, along with the second most fantasy points per game to receivers this season. And this Detroit Lions secondary is banged up. They have so many injuries in that unit. They're down several big-time starters that they just have no one to cover Metcalf in this game. And with the Lions season on the line, hanging in the balance, they essentially need to win out to even have a chance at making the playoffs. I think this offense is going to absolutely go nuts this week against a very average at best Steelers defense at this point, who we know is going to be without TJ Watt. That does not help their case either. I think this game is going to force the Steelers to probably have to throw the football early and often. They're likely going to have to be playing from behind, trying to keep up with this potent Lions offense. I would be starting DK with confidence this week. All right, moving on to our next guy, Bucky Irving, who did have his first down game last week since returning from injury. You don't love to see that, but I don't think you can blame it all on Irving. It was more the flow of the game. The Bucs were trying to get their pass catchers more involved as they had a healthy wide receiver core for the first time all year. Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Jalen McMillan were all active in this game. That being said, Irving still saw 19 opportunities and led this backfield in snaps and rush attempts. I wouldn't go away from Bucky this week. Start your studs in the fantasy football playoffs, and it's a very favorable matchup against the Panthers, who have struggled against the run for most of the year as they rank bottom 10 in rushing yards, touchdowns, and explosive runs allowed to running backs, along with allowing the 10th most fantasy points to the position since week 10. I would not be shocked if Bucky has a big game, if he gets back into the end zone and puts together a very nice fantasy day. So he had a bad performance, but keep him in your starting lineup. All right, moving on to our next guy, Jauan Jennings, who has been an absolute touchdown machine for the 49ers. 4 touchdowns in his last 3 games, wide receiver 20 in fantasy points per game since week 9, along with an impressive 27.9% first read share. Now, I will say, Jauan's targets, receiving yards haven't been great. You're obviously starting him, hoping he scores a touchdown, but I think that what we're seeing from Jennings and Brock Purdy, that connection is heating up. We saw them really gel, perform, put up huge numbers last year, and now with Purdy fully healthy, we're seeing that duo start to click again. And I think Jennings is going to continue to be one of Purdy's favorite targets through the air, especially if Ricky Pearsall is ruled out with the knee injury. Pearsall has not been able to stay healthy this entire season. Super disappointing for him. And the matchup this week is very favorable against the Colts, who have kind of been on a downward spiral over the last month. They're going to continue to be without their top corner in this one, in Sauce Gardner. And since week 10, the Colts have allowed the 3rd most receiving yards per game and the 5th most fantasy points per game to perimeter receivers, along with allowing the 2nd most passing yards per game this season. I think Jennings is set to smash again. All right, moving on to our next guy, Saquon Barkley. You're obviously starting Barkley in the fantasy playoffs. If you made it this far, drafting Saquon, who's been pretty disappointing for a first-round pick this year, but he's finally starting to play like the player that we thought we were drafting in September. 17-plus fantasy points in back-to-back games, a touchdown in back-to-back games, 25 opportunities last week, most since week 11, and he gets one of the easier matchups this week against the Washington Commanders, who have allowed the 6th most fantasy points per game to running backs this season, and nobody has crushed the Commanders more than Saquon has as of late. In 3 games against this defense last year, these were his numbers. Week 11, 26 carries, 146 yards, 2 touchdowns. Week 17, 29 carries, 150 yards, 2 touchdowns. And the NFC Championship game, 15 carries, 118 yards, and 3 touchdowns. I would be expecting Barkley to carry you to the fantasy title game this week. Kudos if he is on your roster. All right, moving on to our next guy, Michael Wilson. I mean, what more can you say at this point? It's clear the talented 3rd-year receiver has been held back by Kyler Murray, who just is not a good quarterback anymore over the last 2 years. Like, he's completely crushed what Wilson could have been doing years ago, in my opinion. I think Wilson is an absolute baller, and this Cardinals offense has looked completely different since Jacoby Brissett took over as QB1. Like, what? Who would have thought that we would be here? But it's crazy. It's been crazy to watch Brissett run this offense, produce as a quarterback for fantasy, and make Michael Wilson the next Calvin Johnson, along with turning Trey McBride into the tight end that we thought he could have been years ago. Right now, I can confidently say Wilson is a much better receiver than Marvin Harrison Jr. at this point. All this dude does is produce. Even with Harrison, looks like he's going to return this week. We don't know how much Marvin's going to play. We don't know how involved Harrison's going to be. He even said in an interview that his heel is good enough to go. It just doesn't sound promising. He just doesn't feel like a part of this offense. They don't need him. I think they're going to continue to feed Wilson regardless. I would not be discouraged that Marvin's returning. I would not let that scare you away from starting Wilson as he gets a much easier matchup this week. He produced against the Texans last week. Imagine what he can do against the Atlanta Falcons, who have been lit up by receivers this year. Mike Evans in week 15 had 6 receptions for 132 yards. Jackson Smith-Njigba in week 14, 7 receptions, 92 yards, 2 touchdowns. Adonai Mitchell, who's an okay receiver, in week 13, 8 receptions, 102 yards, and a touchdown. And on top of that, this Atlanta defense has allowed the second most yards and the most touchdowns to receivers since week 11. There's just no way you can leave Wilson on your bench this week. Fire him up, start him, feel really good about it, and I do think he goes off. All right, moving on to our next guy, Rico Dowdle, who continues to see a ton of work in this Carolina backfield, even with Chuba Hubbard being more involved recently. 17 plus opportunities in 5 out of his last 6 games for Rico. He outcarried Chuba last week, 16-8. You like to see that. And he's been the Panthers' preferred option when they get in close. 100% of the running back touches inside the 5-yard line for Dowdle all year long. Yes, Rico's insane run that he had earlier in the year is gone. He's cooled off drastically, but I do think he's still a very good player. I do think he's still the best running back on this roster, as he ranks 8th in yards after contact per attempt, 15th in explosive run rate. And this Carolina offense should be able to move the football against this average at best Tampa Bay defense, who's allowing 4.6 yards per carry over the last 8 weeks, which is the 8th most in the NFL, along with allowing the most receiving yards and 9th most yards before contact per attempt since week 11. I think Rico is going to get it done on the ground and through the air. I think he also finds the end zone for the 2nd week in a row. So get him in your lineup. Feel really good about it. Okay, here's where my next giveaway is. We're giving away $50 to the first person that comments down below, DM sent on Twitter or on X. Send me a DM on Twitter and give me your Venmo tag, your Venmo username, and I will send you over $50. The first person to comment that down below, and then the first person to DM me on Twitter at ROCFantasy_ gets $50. All right, moving on to our next guy, Ladd McConkey, who's been absolutely brutal for fantasy since week 9. He's had a couple touchdown games that have kind of salvaged his day, but his yards and receptions have been very disappointing. I don't think a lot of it has really been his fault either. This offensive line has been absolutely terrible. Losing stud left tackle Joe Alt for the season was really the turning point, I think, for this offense. I mean, they were already down one of the best offensive linemen in football in Rashawn Slater. They lost him in the preseason, and then they just lost their second best offensive lineman or best offensive lineman. Like, what are you supposed to do? It's really hard to recover from that. Justin Herbert being banged up, having that broken bone in his non-throwing hand hasn't helped things either. There's been a lot of reasons why this Chargers passing game has collapsed as of late, but I do think Ladd can get it done for you this week, and here's why. A lot of my optimism is because of the matchup and potential game script. Dallas has allowed the most touchdowns and fantasy points per game to receivers this season, along with the 3rd most yards. And since week 10, the Cowboys have allowed the 10th most PPR points per target and 7th most receiving yards per game to slot receivers. This matchup also has nice shootout potential, 49.5 point total, which is tied for the 2nd highest game on the slate. The problem is the Chargers haven't been in many shootouts, in many high-scoring games, but this could be one of them. I still think this passing game runs through McConkey, and I think you can feel really good about starting him in your lineup this week, even though it's been brutal as of late. All right, moving on to our next guy, George Pickens. Whatever is going on in Pickens' head, he needs to figure it out ASAP, because this man is throwing away a ton of money. If his lack of motivation, poor performance, doesn't really care continues, it's going to be a problem. But he's on this list because I don't think that's going to happen. George, in my opinion, is still one of the best receivers in the National Football League, and he just happens to be on an offense that loves to throw the football. Even with the Cowboys out of playoff contention, these guys are still professionals. They still want to win. They still want to play well. I'm expecting this entire Cowboys offense to go crazy, even against a stingy Chargers defense. I don't care. Dak has nearly thrown for 700 yards over the last 2 weeks. And yeah, Pickens has been invisible, but that changes this week. His usage has still been really strong, 93% of the snaps last week. And we've seen Pickens go off against good defenses already this year. Week 12 against the Eagles, 9 receptions, 146 yards, a touchdown, 29.6 fantasy points. Remember, the Chargers do have a good secondary, but when you have 2 good receivers in Lamb and Pickens, it's hard to contain both of them. I'm assuming Lamb is going to be the top priority and Pickens is going to eat because of it. Maybe this is more of a gut call than anything, but it just feels like Pickens is going to remind everyone this week why he's one of the best receivers in the National Football League. So if he's on your roster, plug him in. And I do think he comes through in a massive way. That's all I have for you guys today. I really appreciate each and every one of you. Again, if you want to enter the giveaway, all you have to do is subscribe to the channel, like this video, comment down below, keep your eyes out for a Dynasty channel. I hope to start that on here in January or February, and I'll see you in the next one.